Packaging reform is back in focus, with growing pressure on government and industry to move beyond targets and deliver a system that actually works. Following the Environment Ministers' meeting on the 27th of March, momentum is building around a national approach to product stewardship, with calls for a single mandatory extended producer responsibility scheme for packaging. So what would that look like in practice? And what would it mean for industry? With me to discuss this important topic today is Elliot Costello, CEO of Phantm, one of the companies working with other business partners, NGOs, and ministers to help build the case for EPR. Welcome, Elliot, and let's set the context. Everyone is talking about this pivotal time as a critical window for reform, particularly following the recent Environment Ministers' meeting. What has changed politically or structurally that makes this moment different from previous attempts at packaging reform?
Well, in short, our federal politicians and policymakers are listening. As you know, Lindy, this is not a new issue. Packaging reform has been on the and off the agenda since 1999. What's different now is that Minister Watt has formally tasked officials to return to the next EMS, the Environmental Ministers' meeting, with a draft intergovernmental agreement. So this is a delivery mandate, not another request for a review or consultation. So why now? There's a few reasons. The states are growing impatient with the Commonwealth, and they've been asking for national packaging harmonisation. So they're getting tired of inaction. Industry is looking for certainty and clarity. So policy is catching up to where industry is heading. Environmental and conservative groups are growing, I guess, a little bit more ambitious and demanding with their public calls for action. Australia is lagging behind our major trading partners who have moved on EPR schemes. As you know, supply chains are being disrupted. Recycling industry is suffering. And Minister Watt had a remarkable win with the EPBC Act in late 2025. So as a political pragmatist, he's looking for another win. So all of these things are converging right now, and it's creating a lot of momentum towards a national packaging framework to land in 2027.
I, for one, am also tired of inaction. I'm dying to write that story, by the way, that says it is here, reform. The core proposal, one country, one system, is what you're advocating for. It's centered on a single mandatory national EPR scheme. In practical terms, what would that look like for packaging producers operating across Australia today?
It's a term we phrased at Phantm to offer politicians and bureaucrats a catchy tagline. One country, one system, a way to unify all the states and territories together under one umbrella that you and I and many others have been calling for. In practical terms, it simply means less fragmentation, clear national obligations, and confidence for industry to invest, something we all want. So it's one set of definitions, one reporting framework, one fee schedule nationally. And I think we all are begging for it and know it's necessary. So producers would report standardized packaging data into a single independent national system. Fees are material and weight based. Obviously, they're higher for hard to recycle formats and lower for recyclable ones. So the incentive is then to redesign, but it's built into the national structure.
Okay, so let's look at why the current system isn't working. You and many other industry experts beside are saying that the system has failed. We actually all believe that. What are the most critical shortcomings, and why haven't existing initiatives been able to close that gap?
Well, the current voluntary system does not deliver enough value to stakeholders, simply put. Unfortunately, it allows free riders to exist without consequence. So we've failed as an industry to meet our 2025 national packaging targets. I won't litigate that sort of problem. We all know where we landed, but the numbers were clear around recycling rates and recycled content materials, right through to how much millions of tons of plastic packaging waste is going to landfill annually. So we know where we landed with the voluntary system, and it's helped us to get us where we are, but it's kind of plateaued now. And it's time for change, and we're all asking for change. That change needs to be a mandatory approach with stretch national targets and that delivers clear consequences for players who don't play by the rules. So, Lindy, the reality right now is voluntary obligation is just another business risk. When commercial conditions are tight, like today's market, and we'll talk about the priorities later, but things like voluntary reporting get deprioritized. Other priorities take precedence in a pretty volatile market. So this is not a real criticism on industry's intent. There's intent there, but it's just how commercial realities work. Without regulation, momentum is weak, and without momentum, investment simply stalls.
Well, one of the core concerns from industry around EPR is cost. You're saying that the consumer impact is negligible, even close to zero in the early years. How confident are you in that modeling, and what assumptions sit behind it?
Well, I'm a former insufferable accountant, having worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I can tell you right now that costs matter. As a business leader now at Phantm, costs really do matter to us, and it matters to everyone in the industry. You know, we know the bottom line is hurting. So I will say from the start that in this hyperinflationary economy, we've got to be a little bit sensitive with what type of inflationary measures are baked into any policy change. But the modelling we've done at Phantm is robust. It draws on the UK's confirmed 2025 fee base, and it's applied to Australian packaging volumes. Our work has also independently been validated by the Rennie advisory work that I'm sure you've looked at in detail, that was done for ACOR and APCO at the start of 2026, or at least last year, and announced at the start of 2026, which found that EPR adds just 0.1% to product costs. 0.1%. So from our modelling, the most likely scenario works out to be about 25 cents per household on the average grocery bill, which today is anywhere between $200 to $220. So that's 0.1%. So it's quite minimal. But we proposed a phased approach. So zero impact to consumer for the first 1 to 2 years, and giving policymakers that sort of flexibility and freedom to legislate this year, but provide certainty and clarity, but bring in the fee structure in 2028 or even 2029. So that's a lot of flexibility for policymakers. It's important that the policy is drafted correctly. It doesn't always happen in Canberra, but every dollar collected needs to be reinvested into the system. This reduces the long-term waste management costs that you and I pay as ratepayers, and councils obviously foot the bill and have to pass on to us. So they're not sunk costs. These are investments into a national system that needs to work.
Well, let's also look at the impact on local industry and sovereign capability. I mean, we are currently seeing significant disruption in the resin supply and pricing, thanks to the conflict going on. How would a national EPR scheme change the economics for Australian recyclers and packaging manufacturers?
Yeah, great question. You started with recyclers, so I'll start there. This might be slightly controversial, but in light of what I've said about the national packaging targets in 2025 that we failed to meet, but I'll say it. Australia doesn't have a recycling problem. We have a utilisation problem. The infrastructure exists to recycle, but it's running at roughly about half capacity because there's no guaranteed end of market demand. So those offtake agreements aren't there. So I was talking to a major recycler last week, and there is the facility and the capability to recycle, but we don't have the national framework in place to pull recycled content into an economy that's demanding cheaper, simpler virgin plastics. So without reform, this means more closures and potentially thousands of jobs that could be lost. A overarching EPR sort of framework provides the stable, auditable funding stream that gives recyclers that sort of revenue certainty they need to invest and operate. It also generates a sort of local demand for recycled content, which is the thing that's missing right now. So this is the framework that underpins a really good system for recyclers and Australian manufacturers. So as you mentioned, Lindy, we're feeling the effects of a global war, which is really disrupting and kind of flipping upside down the global supply chains again. I mean, some are calling it COVID 2.0. This has exposed Australia's lack of sovereign capabilities. So this is an opportunity This is not a reason to delay policy, it's an opportunity. We import most of our resin and our packaging. Building sovereign domestic capability to produce materials, recycled materials onshore, is a capability issue, something we should all get behind.
Well, EPR systems typically use modulated fees to reward recyclability. So how quickly would this start to influence packaging design decisions in Australia? As we know, it all starts with design.
Well, the core insight is an EPR would reward better packaging design upstream. So not just fund recycling downstream. Recycling is very important, but if you look at the waste hierarchy, it sits at number 3. So we've got to think about the upstream too. How do we encourage better behaviour? So the big opportunity right now is reduction, simplification, and better material selection. So making sure we're bringing the right things into the country and in supporting brand owners to choose the right materials. So the behaviour signal is immediate. It would, an announcement from Minister Watt would be an immediate change for brands who do not want to sit around and wait for fees to land. They start by optimising the moment the direction is clear. And it's already happening, Lindy. At Phantm, we have the great privilege and pleasure of working with some of the most remarkable brands in the country, Mecca, Adairs, Muti, Amazon. These are companies that are all thinking about the future and getting ahead with better packaging design today. APCO, AIP, CFlex, they've all been driving design for recyclability for many years, and they need to be credited for their fantastic work. Regulation doesn't start the conversation. It makes commercial sense and it makes it impossible to ignore.
Mm-hmm. Now, recently you sent an open letter to Environment Minister Murray Watt, which brought together a broad coalition across the industry, NGOs, associations, recyclers. Where is there still disagreement or friction in the system, in the packaging value chain? And what needs to be achieved to reach full alignment?
I wouldn't say there's a lot of disagreement or friction. I think this is quite a unique moment in time where there's a lot of alignment. And one reason I think Minister Watt will move on packaging reform this year is he's surprised how much alignment there is when you can get major NGOs to agree with industry, which isn't the case in a lot of different industries. But I would say there's competing vested interests. It is important to recognise, as you said, the coalition that we brought together on our open letter. We united retailers, brand owners, recyclers, major NGOs, conservation groups. They all united behind the same request, pushing for a national EPR in 2027. So that's significant. Mm-hmm. The need for reform is not contested. What remains, I guess, in dispute is the design of the scheme, the governance, the fee settings, ensuring that there's no single part of the value chain that has a significant influence over the outcomes. And that's probably where the nuance is always in the detail, but that's where we have to trust policymakers. We pay for them to be in Canberra. They need to listen to industry, but all the other players too, and come up with the right policies. So I'd say the remaining tension is about pace and sequencing, not destination.
Well, many of Australia's trading partners, in fact, already have EPR schemes in place. What are our risks if we continue to lag behind, particularly from a trade and market access perspective?
Yeah, great question. This is no longer just a waste policy issue. It's a trade competitiveness issue. As you note, 2/3 of Australia's major trading partners have implemented or are actively implementing an EPR. So I think this stat is 63% of our trading partners have an EPR in place or one that's coming. So if you combine this with the EU's digital product passport, obviously the UK's recyclability modulation, China's recent 2026 recycled plastic standards, this is becoming the cost of market access. So if you're in business, you're looking around the world saying, well, I'm going to build a business in Australia and I want to go into one of these markets. I've now got to think about design standards around the world, even if Australia hasn't moved. So that creates an opportunity for us to develop a credible domestic framework. Australian exporters need it to enter these markets, but the risk isn't just for exporters. It's also for imports too. No laws creates lawlessness. I think that's the old adage as it goes. So without domestic standards and a framework in place, Australia fast becomes the path of least resistance for hard to recycle problematic packaging. So if you can't get your packaging into a regulated market, Australia potentially becomes a dumping ground. So that's the need that Australia has to step up, develop the right standards, and really support both exporters and importers.
So we have seen, though, in other markets that poorly designed schemes can create unintended consequences. So I ask again here, what are the key risks Australia needs to avoid when designing this national EPR scheme?
Well, I mean, put simply, the key risk is to avoid letting perfection get in the way of progress. The greatest risk right now in the pursuit of a perfect scheme would be to delay action and implement a workable one. So we have the framework, we have the coalition, as you mentioned, we have the evidence, and we have the minister's attention. So the priority right now should be to legislate, amend the Raw 2020 Act, build the right data infrastructure and improve the scheme over time. It may not be perfect, and the UK has shown what an imperfect system looks like, but it's not the end destination. This is a journey. So every year that we delay it has a measurable cost. I'd also go a step further just to say that Australia has a unique opportunity to leapfrog other nations. We're late to the party, but it means we can kind of nitpick what other nations have done with their EPR schemes to design a really unique and probably the world-class, maybe even the best in the world system. So as a young and ambitious nation, we can be brave, we can adopt the best technologies, we can lean on the best minds, and we can fast have the best system in place. So yeah, I think that's the opportunity we've got. There's risk, as your question outlined, but there's also opportunities to go a step further.
Certainly more risk not to do anything. Now, from your perspective, what needs to happen next? What's going to happen between now and that next Environment Ministers meeting to ensure that this whole conversation and this whole policy request and push doesn't go to waste?
Yeah, I think this is the exciting part. You know, there's so much momentum now. We've just got to ensure that the train doesn't stop at any stations, and that's difficult in the face of some of the challenges, geopolitical challenges you outlined, Lindy. So the mandate from the March so the Environment Ministers meetings was very clear. Officials need to return to the next M with an intergovernmental agreement that is actionable. So no more consultations, no more reviews, no more kicking the can down the road. So this is about honouring the mandate that was set at the M. I think, you know, most of us are also expecting Minister Watt to make an announcement sometime later this month ahead of the May federal budget. So hopefully this is the first step towards concrete legislative commitment, amending the Raw Act this year, thinking about that sort of data and compliance architecture, pushing industry to start looking at investments and the way that we can, you know, improve our packaging, improve the industry overnight. From our perspective, there's so much we can't control. You know, this is now in the hands of people that need to unite the states and come up with a national framework. Our job in industry is to stay united. It's to remain vocal, as you're doing very well at PKN News, and it's to ensure that the coalition is demonstrating the alignment that is real, because the economics are sound, but the cost of delay will continue to grow. So let's hope that we do get the answer and response we want this year.
Thanks, Elliot, for those insights, and I'm with you all the way.
Thanks, Lindy. Appreciate your time.